person, because every addict is really looking for spirit. And they just get confused and they look for it in drugs and alcohol. But every person who has that desire to get out of their normal consciousness through the aid of some mind altering substance, they're really, they can find it in their own heart. So that's what recovery is all about.
This is Unconditioning, Discovering the Voice Within, with Whitney Ann Jenkins. Hello and welcome to the 71st episode of Unconditioning, Discovering the Voice Within, where I bring on guests and we talk about the inner authentic voice and the challenges and the rewards that come from following it. This week, I have with me Teza Lord. Teza is a spirit artist, an activist, a lifelong yoga and meditation practitioner, a passionate participant in plant medicine and its connection to helping addiction and sobriety. And she was also a botanist illustrator in Harvard University in the 1970s. She's traveled and lived all over the world, including the West Indies and Israel. Teza has such an eclectic and interesting background. I had a brilliant time conversing with her and hearing her story and the wisdom that she gleaned from it. I really feel like we had a heart connection during this conversation, and I am just so excited to share with you Teza Lord. What I typically do is I'll do a separate bio intro of you after our session. So I
Okay.
don't have to go into it being like, Teza, tell me everything about your life, because I
Oh
think
yeah.
kind of like a boring way, because
Oh yeah.
especially as you have like a really eclectic background, that would be really hard for you to do. So
It would take about 40 days and 40 nights. Okay. Yeah. And I love the theme of your podcast. It's so terrific. So let's just go
thank
deep,
you.
deep,
Yeah,
deep, deep.
go
Yeah.
as deep as we can. Yeah, I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So you have such a exquisite background. You're a multi-passionate, which I can relate to as well. And so one of the first things that I like to ask my guests to start off, and you can go as deep as you want with this question. When is the first time that you realized that you had an inner voice of your own and you were able to follow it?
Hmm. Good question. Well, I had a very specific event when I was a child. And, we all have deja vu. I believe every child is aware of the fact that they've been here before and everything is so familiar.
Mhm.
And I had many deja vus, but one particular incident happened as I was washing the dishes, not my favorite chore. And I was kind of spacing out and looking at the bubbles. The soap bubbles were very mesmerizing. I probably hypnotized myself and I was just in a trance. And all of a sudden I heard a voice, which I identified later on, not as a child, as my own inner voice. Because when you hear a voice from within, when you're a child, you don't say, "Oh, that's my voice within." It takes us,
Right.
right? But I knew, well, maybe it was God talking to me or an angel, but the voice was telling me definitely that my life was going to be very different from anything I could ever imagine, and
Mm.
that I should just prepare myself for something extraordinary. And it wasn't going to be about washing dishes. Although we all have to wash a dish every now and then.
Right, yeah. So how old were you at that point? Do you
I
remember?
think I was about 5.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah, I had not yet come to what they call the age of reason, where, because I was very mesmerized by this whole incident. And I used to do things to make myself have out of body experiences. All kids do. They twirl, they make snow angels.
Hmm.
They do all sorts of things to, eat your favorite food that makes you have an experience outside of yourself. But
Absolutely.
yeah, that
Yeah.
that was a changing, it guided me, that voice guided me for the rest of my life.
Yeah. So from that moment on, the family or environment that you were raised in, was it supportive of this exploration for you
Mm,
to, yeah.
No, 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 no. I was considered either quite mentally disturbed, or I was called nervous. I was called bad. All these labels, my poor parents, they did the best they could. We all have to reconcile the family that we choose to come into. And I think my family definitely pushed me to become who I am because they tried their very best to control me, to tame me, and they did a good job of screwing me up. So I had a lot of work to do. So it
Yeah,
was it was either do the work or die for me.
I can understand that. So you were 5 years old, and then you were within this environment and raised within that family. So, how did you maintain your connection to this voice inside of you throughout that time?
Well, I did a lot of running away, literally. I just couldn't stand where I was. And to tell you the truth, I really had trouble being human. Like when I'm an artist and a writer, you probably know that from
Mhm.
having checked me up. But some of my earliest endeavors with creativity were to be a jellyfish, to be a bird, to be a flower, to be a particle of nature, because I just didn't feel comfortable in the confines of a human, label. So the running away I did was not just physically, but mentally and spiritually. I just was always in a dream world. And being an artist, I copied everything I could. I was always getting in trouble for pressing too hard on the pictures in the encyclopedia back in the day, because we had encyclopedias before the internet came along. And
Mhm.
I in order to learn how to draw, I destroyed some precious books by copying and pressing hard, and I taught myself to draw at a very young age. So drawing and creating things helped me to escape. And reading, I've always loved reading, and anything that helped me have the story, the adventure out of the family that I was in, because I was always getting in trouble, just constantly being punished and reprimanded.
Would you say that you were more introverted as a kid or extroverted?
I'm definitely a combination of
Yeah.
both. I'm very introverted when I'm in the learning mode. I mean, I observe, and I'm just a silent witness. But I'm a total ham when I'm relaxed and I feel in my essence. I can really ham it up. So I'm both.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mhm.
So, at what point were you able to break free from that family dynamic? Did you have someone that you were able to connect to get you to that point, or was it all on your own?
No, I had no one. Okay, the way I disconnected was the day I graduated from high school, which I had been misbehaving all throughout high school. I mean, I'm a recovering addict. I'll just be very frank about it. I'm 40 years sober. That's more than,
Congratulations. Yeah.
yes, more than half my life. I got sober at 36. And up until that point, I was hell bent. My adventure was to get out of my head on whatever way I could. But in high school, I was a teenage alcoholic. There were no drugs around at that time. I'm sure I would have been any kind of a addict had I had access to those things. So by the time I graduated from high school, and nobody knew this, by the way, it was totally secret. I mean, I was just a sneaky person. Nobody knew my mischief because my parents had their own addictions that was going on in my home too. So they didn't pay attention to mine because they were so
Hmm.
consumed with their own. It
Yeah.
was not a happy, centered spiritual house, that's for sure. I've often wondered, who would I be had I had the Dalai Lama as a father and Mother Teresa as a mother? I'm sure I would have
Right.
been different.
Right, but you wouldn't have had to follow your diamond, that thing within you,
Yeah, I
so
definitely
so
needed
hard.
the
So
parents I had. So in high school, I just picked up my diploma and literally waved to everybody, and I ran out of the auditorium, hopped on a bus, and just basically ran away from my life. Just kept running and running and running and running and having adventures. And eventually ending up in the West Indies for all the
Uh-huh.
70s, sailing and adventuring. And I had a great time running away.
Did you have a first destination that you went to when you hopped on the bus?
Yes, I did. I was off to Wildwood, New Jersey, where I had a summer job. Mind you, I was only 17, so I didn't have too many life experiences at that point. But the destination was to get out of my little
Right.
hick town. Let's see, it was upstate New York at that point.
Yeah. So from there to the West Indies, and then in your story, where does it go from there? Like,
Well, the West Indies was a whole decade of adventures and doing business and doing art and living in the jungle with third world people and living in a dictatorship island and ending up, with hurricanes ruining everything. And then eventually, what happened after the West Indies is I ended up in Israel. What a place, huh? To go from the West Indies to Israel. I spent a year there and really got to understand what's happening in the Middle East. Was working with my art, exploring different things because it was the Middle East. And I ended up there because I was married actually to an Israeli American basketball player. Of
wow. Wow.
I said, this is a good solution. Instead of running away on my own, I'll just marry this guy who, offered me an adventure. So I was not following love at that point because when you're an addict, it's hard to understand love until you have had the self love experience. And I had not yet had that until I got sober, put down the drugs and the alcohol.
Right. And so where were you at that point? Was there something that happened that like brought you to a point where you had no choice, or how did
Oh
that
yeah.
happen?
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Every addict who's listening is like nodding their head. Obviously,
Mhm.
you're not an addict because you don't. I mean, every addict has to have a bottom. Otherwise, why should we change?
Right.
Addiction is addiction. Whether your addiction is shopping, or sex, or misbehaving, or whatever, or drugs and alcohol, you never change unless you have a bottom, a reason to change, and and then some people don't change even after they've had just a normal bottom, like myself. I've had mental, physical, and spiritual bottoms. And so finally I had nothing but emptiness in my soul. And so I said, okay, am I going to live or am I going to die? Because it was really that choice when you get to the end of the line with addiction. And so at the age of 36, that was like 1984, I just asked for help and I went into recovery. The 12 steps are beautiful. The 12 steps of recovery. If anyone is listening to this and they're struggling with any kind of an addiction, check out. They have so many different versions of
Mhm.
recovery. So that was wonderful.
Yeah. And how did your life change from that point on?
Oh,
Mhm.
well, I'm a stubborn cookie. And so, they give out these chips in recovery. You get a little chip if you have 30 days, another little chip if you have 6 months. And I had a whole bracelet full of them because I just kept slipping and messing up and being stubborn. And finally, my father, who had gotten sober, and he was 13 years sober when he died. So I got to know my father at the end
Oh,
of
wow.
his life. What a wonderful person, because every addict is really looking for spirit. And, they just get confused and they look for it in drugs and alcohol. But every person who has that desire to get out of their normal consciousness through the aid of some mind altering substance, they're really, they can find it in their own heart. So that's what recovery is all about. So my dad just kind of shook me up and said, okay, you're misbehaving and you got to get straight and you got to stop doing this messing around business. And I said, but dad, you're not supposed to say that. In recovery, it's just keep trying, keep coming back. He said, that doesn't work for you. I know you. You got to take this seriously. And he was right. I would have just messed around with recovery probably a lot longer, but he gave me a good talking to, and it was what I needed. I consider my father one of my guides, even though he was a pain in the neck as a child, because he was the alcoholic in the home. And anybody who has even one alcoholic knows that the whole family is just disruptive and it's dysfunctional. You can't have a normal home if somebody's in addiction because it's a family disease. The whole family gets affected by it. So my father helped me get straight. And then through the help of good guidance, like finding the right helper who is what they're called sponsors, but they could be mentors. And because I had done so much sailing in the Caribbean and diving and being in the ocean, I compared getting sober to diving in the deep, deep, deep ocean. And nobody in their right mind ever goes diving by themselves. It's just too dangerous.
Right.
Everything, things can go wrong. A big shark could appear, a barracuda. You can get tangled up with stuff. So you always have a guide or a companion. So getting your life on track from having been into addiction is like that. You need a guide. You can't do it by yourself. It's really difficult.
Yeah, and you found one that you resonated with, it sounds like.
Yes, it was really wonderful, and I've always been a spiritual kind of junkie, along with all the other drugs and alcohol. I'm one of the early plant medicine imbibers. One of my roles as an artist was to be a botanical illustrator for plant medicine botanists, ethnobotanists who were studying the effects of coca,
Wow.
ayahuasca, San Pedro, mescaline, all those things at
Yeah.
Harvard.
Wow. Okay. So to talk about that for a little bit and your experiences with those medicines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because they're so popular right now.
Yeah, it's very trendy.
It's very trendy. Mm-hmm.
So
Where should we start?
yeah,
Where
and
should we start?
because you had like a connection to your spiritual self like before you imbibed in those substances. What was your experience like to having that coming from that place?
Well, I tell anybody who asks me about plant medicine is do not take anything recreationally. When people take mushrooms or ayahuasca and just think that it's a party, they're going to have a freaky experience because you're sacrileging the ritual, this holy substance. And it's the same with LSD. I also was into LSD, but we took it, a group of us, as ritual LSD takers. In those days, actually, Leary and Alpert, Richard Alpert had not yet become Baba Ramdas when I was taking LSD in Harvard Yard, where these two guys were getting kicked out of Harvard.
Right.
You know the story, don't you?
Yeah, very well, yeah.
And then of course when Richard Alpert came back from India as Baba Ramdas, I mean, whoa, I was right there with him. I spent a lot of time with Baba Ramdas.
Hmm.
But the whole experience of taking mind altering substances, like I was one screwed up little girl, and
Right.
I became one like determined to do herself in teenager. And as a young woman, I really didn't think I was going to live past my 21st birthday because I was hell bent on, I was a thrill seeker. I mean, today it would be called extreme, whatever, extreme sports, extreme behavior. I just was addicted to that.
The
And
adrenaline, yeah.
yeah, the adrenaline, even stealing, that's an addiction. And or lying, that's an addiction. How much can I get away with? People don't have to know the real me. I can just keep making things up. That's an addiction. But so my mind was very confused, and because of the different things that I did before I got to meditation, which is the best and the ultimate way to attain the highest that our spirit and our mental and our body can show us to be. But before that, I had to explore everything else because I was the type of person who was interested. And also, my life led me there. I was drawing for ethnobotanists who,
Hmm.
very famous guys today. Richard Schultes was my boss. He was the head of the botany department at Harvard. And I was drawing all the Coca family for Tim Plowman, who became the the world authority on coca, and Wade Davis, who was doing a lot of anthropology work, and different people who very well known today in the plant medicine world. But what I'm trying to say is, I would never tell anybody not to do plant medicines, but to approach it as if it were a divine gift, because they are plants of divinity, and they will absolutely blow your mind, and they will change your mind. And if you're not approaching it with extreme respect and certain conditions, like quiet and protection from the outside world, and not partying, and
Yeah.
not with other people who are disrespecting your journey, then you might have a very bad experience. So it has a danger. Like, there's a saying that comes from an ancient scripture about the spiritual life in general. It's like walking the edge of a razor. It's like walking the razor's edge. It can be very dangerous if you don't respect the journey. And so it's true even with plant medicine. So does that
Yeah.
answer your question? It's kind of
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
roundabout way to get
No,
there.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So as these things are being studied and like entering more into the mainstream, um, do you feel that that sacredness will be respected, or how can we
Well,
approach
that's my
that?
job. That's my job.
Yeah.
I talk about it a lot. I'm so happy when people ask me about the plant medicines and my experiences with psychedelia, and how is it that I am so dedicated to the natural way of meditation. I do yoga every day. My chakras are always getting tickled, and I do chanting to make my cells vibrate. I hang with people who are not toxic. There's so many things that we can do besides taking the plant medicines. But Michael Pollan, who wrote this book, Change Your Mind, have you read that? Oh, she's got it on her shelf. Right. I mean, he did a wonderful job of explaining it. I love his writing. I love his viewpoint. I love the fact that he was the guinea pig. He and his wife actually took these microdoses of everything from psilocybin to, whatever. I think he took a little acid. He took a little, whatever, a lot of things I can't remember what they're called. But he took a little bit of whatever everybody is doing these days, and some on their own. And that's not so good, but it's under the guidance of either a therapist or a mentor who understands the power of plant
Yeah.
medicine is best. I have known people who've really never come back. They go out there exploring, psychonauts, they're called now, aren't they? Like, we're exploring our psyches,
Yeah.
and we're psychonauts. And people have done this all throughout history, starting with the first one who documented it was Emanuel Swedenborg in the 17th century. Do you know about the Swedenborgians?
A
So,
little bit, but yeah, for the listeners, perhaps you could explain a little.
well, yeah. So Swedenborg at the time, he was from Sweden.
Imagine that.
Swedenborg, yeah, Swedenborg from Sweden, and I believe it was in the 17th century. And he, at the time, he was probably the world authority on any of the known sciences. And at that time, there were very few sciences. Psychology hadn't been discovered yet by Freud or talked
Right.
about. And so Emanuel Swedenborg, he was a very wealthy man. He didn't have a family, and he was very interested in learning all he could. So he basically locked himself in a room, told his housekeeper, okay, you can put food at my door, but don't bother me. And he had no responsibilities of family or work because he was wealthy. And he had already written great treatises on every known science there was. So he said, well, what's left? In those days, the only thing that he could think of is, well, what's happening inside? What's happening in my mind? What's happening with all these thoughts? What's happening with these feelings? And so he decided to explore them, and he wrote about them. And that's the basis of what came to be a religion. It's a form of Christian religion. It's called Swedenborgianism. Swedenborgianism. And there's still a church of Swedenborgianism in at Harvard Square. because it's basically came to America in Boston, because that's where the early settlers really had a lot of
Right.
their their cultural centers. So it's something that people have always been interested in. Where is this feeling thing going? This connection, this mystery, this this uncanny feeling I have that there's something more to life than just blood and guts, going to work, having kids, and dying.
Yeah. Right. Like a purpose.
Right. Or a connection.
Yeah.
I would say the purpose is important, but for me, the connection was oneness, the oneness that we are. And so plant medicines really give that to you in spades. And the ancient indigenous people and indigenous people today know this. And that's why they revere it. And anybody, please stay away from peyote. Do not go out and pick the peyote, because this plant is precious and it takes forever to grow. And the indigenous out in the west of America, they need their peyote for rituals.
Mhm.
Along come all the white people starting in the 70s. Oh, peyote, peyote, peyote. And they've almost wiped out the peyote that grows naturally in the deserts of the southwest of America. And there's other things that grow more prolifically, like San Pedro cactus and ayahuasca too. But ayahuasca has to be taken. This is the thing about the plant medicines that people don't know. There are formulas. There
Mhm.
are combinations of plants that must be adhered to, because otherwise, if you just took pure ayahuasca, that's not going to be as beneficial as if you took it with a plant. One of the plants that I was drawing was called Brunfelsia, which is the tree form of Datura. And the specific reason that you take a little bit of this plant with ayahuasca is so that you never lose the sensation that you have a body, that it's tingling or it's cold or you feel it. Because when you're in that spatial oneness, that some of the plant medicines really get you to, like fast, you need to know that you have a body,
Right. Like a
because
grounding.
the grounding, and that's part of the experience,
Mhm.
because the holiness of this this experience called being human is that we are human, and that we can attain enlightenment in our humanness. We don't have to evolve and become a molecule of water. We can do this with our consciousness.
Right. That reminds me of what you were describing as you were a kid of trying to become everything but human. Um, and now you're talking about work to integrate yourself into that groundedness of being a human.
Yes, the
Yeah.
highest form of
Yeah.
human is spectacular, but we have to go through all the dirt, all the purification, we call it in the yoga world. We purify, we purify, we purify, and well, what do we purify? Like, we're only shown little by little all the layers until we finally strip away all our bad habits or insecurities or fears. The different ways that fears manifest, until finally we get to this pure essence of who we are. And guess what? We're pure love in our humanness. We are pure love. And you see that when you witness a child being born. When you see a baby, do you have a child,
I do not
Whitney?
know.
Well,
No,
I,
not
I
yet.
don't either. I'm stepmom to my husband's but children. So, but every time I've been around a newborn, I've
Yeah.
not given birth myself. It's a miracle. It's the
Mhm.
same miracle that you feel when you're in the presence of someone who has left their body. We have a good friend who's just left his body last night,
Mhm.
and we had a grandchild born just a month ago. And it's like those two opposites, they balance each other. This is our humanness. We live in these miracles of birth and death, and the things that we can do in between it's just a beautiful mystery.
Absolutely. And as you're an artist too, I would like to maybe talk about creativity a little bit and what that means to you and the connection to that.
Well, the creativity is also is okay. In terms of yoga, we talk about consciousness evolving through chakras. The
Right.
chakras get
Mhm.
opened up. And the very first chakra is just survival, right? Just learn to get out of the snowstorm. Do not get yourself hit by a bolt of lightning, that kind of basic stuff. That's basic 101, how to live. The second chakra, which is an evolution, a raising up of our consciousness, is creativity. Right after survival is creativity. Now, that can either be procreate, which means we start getting interested in sex, or it means our spiritual creativity. Both of those things arise at the same time in adolescence. And
Mhm.
depending on what gets nurtured, like in my case, my spiritual yearning, which is called the Kundalini, it was
Mhm.
activated around 13. Had I had different parents, and they could have said, oh yeah, this understanding of yours, wanting to know these mysteries, like, who am I? Everybody remembers those questions coming into our mind when we're adolescents. Who am I? What's going on? What is life? What are we here for? That's the awakening of our creativity. And so if it's not nurtured as a spiritual thing, then it will go into the sexual energy, and we become sexualized. And until the day when we realize that the spiritual energy is the real creativity, that even when the sexual energy is dissipated, or somebody's not giving it any energy, like a monk or a nun or somebody who's just not interested in sex, there are those people, they become spiritually creative. So the energy of creativity is so much a part of our humanness that it comes right after survival. Isn't that interesting?
It's fantastic. I'm actually getting my PhD right now in psychology, and I'm focusing on performers and their boundaries and the connection between creativity and sexuality. And
Oh,
you just summed everything up like perfectly, like more than
I'll
I've
tell.
ever been able to like find anywhere else. So yeah.
Well, it's so connected. Like the reason that a lot of leaders become sexual scandals, like even in the yoga world, in the Indian guru world, in the American evangelical world, in the United States presidential world, and every area of life where there's leaders, they get the energy mixed up because they've been pumped up with their egos, and what was spiritually meant to be, the yoga leaders, the evangelicals, it gets thrust into the sexual realm, and they get confused because it's the same chakra.
Mhm.
And so it's something that it has been written about by many yogis, how this is a known thing. And I believe Jesus even was talking about it when he talks about he was in the garden and he had all these temptations come. Here he was, the one of the greatest spiritual like impacts of our known humanity, and he's talking about it in the garden. Gethsemane, was it Gethsemane, where he had all these temptations, and we have to deal with it, and the spiritual and the sexual. But I also feel that it's our answer for survival. As everybody's saying, oh God, what are we going to do, the environment?
Mhm.
Well, hello, all the answers are waiting for us to discover, because we are creative beings.
Right.
If we
Right.
just Yeah, if we just get out of the fear factor. So even more reason to take
Mhm.
plant medicines
Mhm.
for those who are stuck in fear. Like, get out of the fear as fast as you can, get into a meditation practice to sustain that experience of love, which is our pure essence. And then the creative valve is open full force. It's like a faucet. It just pours out of us.
Yeah. We are creators as we are created.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How interesting that you're getting your PhD on the boundaries. Wow. Of specifically performers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
I'm an actor and a musician myself, but as an actor, I've often battled that line of creativity and sexuality because it's very
Oh,
goes back and
oh
forth and
yeah.
it's very confusing, especially
Oh
when
yeah.
you're thrust in intimate situations on stage or like in a scene or it's
Oh
very
yeah.
yeah.
Right. Look at all the leading ladies who fall in love with their leading man. I mean,
Yeah.
Liz Taylor and Richard Burton, they just couldn't stop.
Yeah. It's a thing. It's a thing.
Yeah, it absolutely is a thing, especially because you can't fake it when you're kissing, especially on a camera. You got the camera right there. You can't fake it and say, "Oh, I don't like this guy." Come on, you got to get into it.
Right. And sometimes you want to, and that's okay.
Yeah,
But
it is okay.
but afterwards there's consequences sometimes. So
Yeah,
yeah.
right. For that's
So
another thing too. For every action, there is a
yeah.
reaction. There is, and as long as we know that,
Hmm.
it helps us make our decisions.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So do you guide people in like plant medicine? Is that something that you do?
No, I'm an
No.
artist and a writer. I
Yeah.
am getting ready to publish my fifth book. I'm
Oh,
so busy. I'm so
congratulations.
I know this is a magical book that I'm bringing to the world. It's my first novel. There are some things that you just need fiction. You need your imagination to
Hmm.
explain,
Yeah.
especially when you're talking about the magical connection of our human energy being connected to the divine, and which is all around us all the time. And a lot of us can't access it. We don't know that it's available for us. And those of us who do work with that power, that which is within us, it's not just like, something that we have to go to a mountain or go even to a temple to find. It's in our body temple, this this beautiful body. That's why it's so important to keep it clean and keep it healthy, and to not mess it up with the vibration of too much like negative stuff. Don't watch the news too much so that you're contracting in fear all the time. Don't hang out with people who are dissing you or say you're no good. Get rid
Mhm.
of them. Get rid of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So the book that you are noveling.
Noveling. Oh, that's a good way. I like that. Fiction. Yeah, noveling. Uh-huh.
Um, would you like to share about it? Like the story
Well,
or
yeah, it'll be coming out. So I hope everybody who's interested in what I'm talking about will go to my website, Teza Lord, and sign up on my author email. I can tell I'm afraid to tell the
well,
title yet
if you
because somebody
if
might
you
steal the title.
no, if you feel like you need to protect it, then to protect it. So like don't feel like you need to.
Yeah, well, it's going to be published in a month, but I'll tell everything except I don't want to tell the title because it's such a fabulous title. I don't want anybody to go and steal it from me. Even you copyright those things and you have protections, but still people do that. And it's a story that I started when 9/11 happened. I was so struck with the importance of what 9/11 signified. It was the end of an era of just being free without, because I used to travel practically without a passport internationally down in
Mhm.
the Caribbean. You could hop from island to island basically just by going to the airport and saying, "Hey, can I have a ride? From Guadeloupe to Martinique." And
Yeah.
those days are over because of the terrorism that we have to live with now. And that was never really brought to our consciousness except through 9/11's horror. And that changed everything.
Yeah.
And so it should, because there's always change. And some people are freaked out about that. But once you embrace the fact that there is always change, always evolution, always metamorphosizing, and always flux and always motion, then I'm comfortable with that, right? Because I can dance with it. But if you say, no, I've got to stay this way, this is what makes me happy, person like that is going to be unhappy in life because they're freaking out all the time because things are always going to change. So the story begins with my relationship with what happened, and I had real messages from the cosmic oneness, and I was told to write this story. So I wrote it then, and I actually tried to show it to publishers about a year after I worked on it. And at the time, people were traumatized still. It was just such an event. So it was too much too soon. People needed to heal. And
Mhm.
so now we are 20 some years away from it, 22 or 3. And those of us who still treasure the fact that this was a monumental thing. I mean, there's a lot of kids who weren't born yet. It's just like an event that they hear about. But those of us who lived through it, I mean, it's there's before 9/11 and there's after 9/11. And so it's a story culminating with 9/11, but it begins way before. And it's about how the message from the universe comes through our human action. So there's a bigger message about
Yeah.
what's happening rather than what actually appeared to happen. So it's magical. It's a really
Yeah.
magical event.
Yeah. I would love to read that.
Oh,
Yeah.
good. You can be one of my first readers. I'll take you
Yeah.
up on that. And
Yeah.
you could, yeah.
I was in high school when that happened.
Uh-huh.
So yeah.
Yeah. And I used to live in that neighborhood, Tribeca, which is close to Wall Street. So it was really like my home turf, but I was not in New York City at the time. But yet, by being an artist, we can visualize the way things are, and we can create them in our mind first, and then we create them either with paint or film or words or dance, whatever. And so with a story like a fiction story, it's the same way. We can create things the way that they are in our higher or our magical mind, our relationship with our humanness, and it's not possible to do that in real life. So a nonfiction, a truly nonfiction covering of 9/11 would never be able to cover what I covered in my book.
Absolutely. Yeah. Storytelling is really powerful, and something that I'm really passionate about, because yeah,
Yes.
it it can connect our universality in our most intimate moments.
Yes, absolutely. And our fantasy, our creativity, that's the same energy that arises from the spiritual and the sexual. That's the second chakra. It's just so much a part of us. And yet I meet so many adults who say, "Oh, I haven't got a creative bone in my body." Well, they are living in negation of who they are. They just have forgotten, because every child is a creative genius. And any person who wants to tap into that creativity that they were so comfortable with as a child, they can. They can do that. And they just have to stop thinking that they can't.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's the trick, right?
Yeah, that's the trick. And that's why I love meditation so much, because meditation is really the unwinding of the thinking process.
Yeah. And the title of my podcast, Unconditioning. So there you
Yes, unconditioning.
go.
Because I
Yeah.
don't even like labels. I mean, this whole thing about gender identity and all DEI stuff. And come on, I mean, like when you're truly in your spiritual power, the label thing is so
Um,
unnecessary.
yeah, I don't really understand it myself, because it seems like the people who are asking to not have labels are just putting themselves into a label.
Well, that's true, but yeah, you have to be comfortable. And so, like
Yeah.
my personal pronouns are S/HE/IT. Shit. I call my, if anybody wants to know, I relate to my maleness, I relate to my femaleness, I relate to my godliness, which has
Right.
no gender.
Yeah.
So I think that it's okay to not want a label, because even like living outside the country, for instance, a lot of people, when they found out I was an American, it's really different than
Yeah. Right.
when they think you're Canadian or
Mm-hmm.
or
Oh,
from
yeah.
some other they relate to you differently. So I would actually fib. I would say, "Oh, I'm Canadian or I'm Australian." I could put on an accent. I mean, just because I'd like to see how it is when people connect with me without knowing what I am, where I came from, what's my background, like what's my privilege or not my privilege.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think also, to add the spiritual into that, I like the divine feminine and the divine masculine, which we all have within us, where it's all fluid and working together at the same time.
Yes, yes, I believe so.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There's a dream I had once before I really surrendered to this is a spiritual experience. I was still in the early days of, how am I going to work with this? I was still walking the edge of the razor. And so I had this dream. And in classic textbook studies of the Kundalini arising, your spiritual
Yeah.
yearning, when it's awakened, a lot of people have this dream of what they call the blue person. Have you ever heard of the blue person? Yeah, so
Yeah.
I had a dream of the blue person. And in my dream, it was a male, but not a sexualized male, like a very beautiful, kind of neutral male. But when you meet the blue person in your dreams, this is your own spiritual self. And this male figure, it was like Krishna. He had long hair, his skin was blue, kind of umber, like glowing blue and brown, deep brown. And he was playing the flute, and he was in a big, beautiful palace with no furniture, just beautiful space. And meeting him was meeting myself, but he was in his maleness. And so I was reading after I had this dream about the blue person. Usually it is the same sex. If you're a woman, you'll meet a beautiful blue woman, and vice versa. But I've always had a very comfortable relationship with my aggressive kind of strength. I'm very tall. I'm very muscular from doing yoga so much, and being involved with physicality. Like I've done a lot of gardening and heavy work. I had a restaurant at one time, and I have forearms like a
Oh,
bricklayer
wow.
from baking bread. So I love the strength of my male like ness, and I love the sensitive, nurturing part of my femaleness. I
Mhm.
own it all.
Yeah. I think we all have that within us.
Some people don't acknowledge it though, or
Yeah.
they get like a macho guy. It's so
Mhm.
hard. As a yoga teacher, I've experienced like to get men to come to yoga class. It's a lot better now, but when yoga first started hitting the mainstream, they just thought, oh, this is a chick thing. And then finally, we heard about people like Sting, who loves yoga and has been doing yoga forever. And so when people saw what a great looking guy he is, they said, oh, well, if Sting can do it, I can do it, right? And
Yeah.
William Defoe is another one. William Defoe, who's my age, and he's been doing yoga all his life too.
Yeah. Do you adhere to a specific yoga style or
No,
no?
it's Teza style. I've studied most of the different styles. And I always heat up. I have my own private little yoga place. I call it the Santosha Shack. Santosha meaning contentment. It's one of the qualities of a yogic life. And so I go into my Santosha Shack, and it's heated up to 100 degrees because I think it's very important to sweat and to get the toxins out. And it's so of course there's a well-known yogic teacher who's associated with the hot yoga, who we don't talk about anymore because he's an
Right.
official rapist. You know who I mean. But
Yeah.
I studied all the different types of yoga, in the hot, in the cold, with this and with that. And it's just fascinating how every single person does yoga differently.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
love it.
I love it too. I love that you love it.
Yeah, talking about yoga, do you know Michael Sanford? I'm Matthew Sanford. He's the guy I heard about him 20 years ago in Yoga Journal, and just now people are paying more attention to him. He's paralyzed. He's a paraplegic. He was paralyzed at the age of 13, and he was very sad, as a young boy, to lose his limbs from the nipple down, he says. So he has upper body. But he discovered yoga when he was like mid 20s. Do you know about Matthew?
I don't know.
Yeah. And so his book is called Waking. I'm just reading it. It's an amazing story what this guy has been through. But yoga saved his spirit
Yeah.
because because his spirit was just so out of touch with his body, his humanness. And he was like in prison in his mind. So
Right.
it's a beautiful story about how even if you're paralyzed, you can connect with the body, mind, spirit
Mm,
concept of what yoga is.
yeah. I'll have to look into that one.
Yeah,
Reiki. Yeah.
it's pretty amazing. And I have written a book. I have it here because I'm finishing. It's called In the Eye. Can you see? Oh, is it backwards? Yeah. In
Yeah, I
in
can.
it In the Eye is about me teaching yoga to girls in prison, at risk juvenile delinquents, and they've been sentenced to like lengthy stays for repeat offense. And I had the privilege of sharing my love of yoga with these young gals, and it was life altering for not
Yeah.
only them but for me too. So that was the
Oh,
first. Yeah, that was the first nonfiction book that I did.
I imagine. Yeah. So speaking of I, does your name mean something in particular to you?
Yes, Teza is my spiritual name. I was christened something else, and I always went by my last name, which was Bates. Like I was, as a kid, I said, "Yes, I'm Norman's sister," from Psycho. And but Bates is the name that I just used ever since I realized I don't have to use this surname. I mean, the Christian name that I was given. I use my surname. And when I started doing plant work with botanists who went to Latin America, especially the Amazon, they all speak Spanish. So they started calling me, instead of Bates, I became Bateza. And when I
Ah,
heard Tez, I said, "Oh, wow, that's who I am." And
oh,
so I officially named myself L, which stands for my old name, L Teza, and it's a cool name, L Teza, but I go by Teza.
yeah. I like it a lot. It
Yeah,
suits it suits you.
yeah, it does. And names are very special because somebody has a name that they're not fond of, it doesn't ring like, oh yeah, that's who I am. Change your name, experiment. Like, the Native Americans had a custom. I don't think they do it so much anymore because a lot of Native Americans don't follow their traditional indigenous customs, but they used to have where everybody who knew this newborn child would give it a name. It could have anywhere from 3 to 5 to 10 names, the family clan. And then as the child grew, it was called all these different names until finally one day the child declared, "This is the name that I am. I know I am this name."
We are very connected to our names as a child too. So if it has a negative connotation, like sometimes
Right.
that can
Yeah.
follow us.
My original name was Linda. I'll spill the beans. And it was just too common. I'm sorry. All those Lindas out there. I was born in the year when that song was just being played on the airwaves, and everybody named their little girl Linda. Yeah.
Yeah. So so you've been following like this spiritual thing within you for a while, and you've probably seen spirituality become kind of like a trendy topic and
I love it. I love it.
yeah. So like where do you see us going from here?
Well, that's the subject of my last nonfiction book called Hybrid Vigor. I have it here. And Hybrid Vigor is a study of the spiritualization of humans, our human blended family. As in particularly, it's related to animals. This book, Hybrid Vigor, is about the animals bringing me messages, bringing me insights, bringing me the real truth, the proof that we are one. Like, for instance, it starts off with me calling in a pod of dolphins just by using my mental ability, repeating a sacred mantra. And the dolphins responded. and there's and like that's magic, man. When you can tune into that kind of interconnections, interspecies stuff. Just
Mhm.
imagine what we can do with our own species. So we are becoming spiritualized. I declare this right now. We are not going to doomsday. We are not at the end of, civilization as we know it. Anybody who says that is in fear. They have not yet unlocked the power of love. And they're doing themselves a terrible disservice because they're crunching their creative force and locking it in fear, and they're dooming their own happiness. So the sooner that somebody can get out of fear, the better. And I feel that that's my job as an artist, and a spiritual artist in particular. And I do that through books. I feel that books are more, for me, it's a more profound way of expressing that, rather than creating one piece of art, or even a film or a mural, or a statue, or a collaboration. But a book is something that you can really dive into, and it also can be made into a film, because my husband and I made a beautiful film together about, I call it an eco fable. It's like an environmental comedy. I, I play a Mother Nature type of character with bright red hair. It's so cool. But there's all sorts of ways that you can help, like social media, for instance. I put up positive posts. I never ever feed into the drama, the fear, the trolls. I never respond to any of that stuff. I just delete, delete, delete. Like, for instance, if anybody comes on my social media and starts talking about Osho, I delete them, because I have a bone to pick with Osho, because Osho really brought a bad rap to spirituality,
Yeah.
and through the leadership of what is known as gurus, teachers. And it's just like unforgivable. And so I just don't deal with negativity. And I put out positive meditation, guided meditation on YouTube, which are called mind stillers. And my husband and I podcast. So, there's so much that all of us can do, even if we're not a public person. We can watch what we say
Yeah.
when we're with another person, and we can uplift the vibration. Like if somebody starts saying, oh, it's a terrible time in our lives, and we're getting ready for this crazy time, the next year is going to be crazy. But we can also say, yeah, but it's also the crossroads of so much that we have to choose from. And it's an exciting time to be alive. It's really a thrill to be alive at this particular moment in history.
Absolutely. And we're lucky to have you as a guide to help us through there.
Yeah.
So if people would like to purchase a book of yours or see your work, where could we guide them?
Well, I have a great website. I call it the Mothership. Come on aboard the Mothership. Yeah, Teza Lord. That's just with one Z, TezaLord.com. And of course, I'm on Amazon, and the podcast. Everything's on TezaLord.com, though. The podcast, and
Okay.
1,000 years of blogging, all that stuff.
Yeah, great. I'll add your links into the show notes so people can click on it
Okay,
and
great.
access it really easily. So yeah, before we wrap up, is there anything that is like on your heart or your mind that you feel like you would like to share?
Well, I think there are a lot of people who are going through hard times right now, especially young people. And I know myself, I was really screwed up as a young person. I didn't have any guidance. And I just want to offer any kind of love or comfort, and also trust when I trust me when I say that life is really magical, and to tap into that magic is the privilege. It's like our birthright of being human. So how do we get there? So there's so many tools out there today. There's so many people like me who are in the positive thought movement, and they call us thought influencers, whatever. There's 103-year-old Gladys McGarry, who's she's a thought influencer. She wrote this fabulous book called A Well-Lived Life. you know just like to find what she calls your juice.
Mm,
Find what turns you on. And I don't mean what drug or what, rapper. I mean, like, what thing inside of you just feels like, wow, this is what I'm here for.
right.
And and it took me a long time to find that. And it's okay if it takes a long time to find it, but that's the quest. That's the spiritual quest. And not to give up hope, and just turn off the news.
Mm-hmm.
If anybody gets freaked out about what's happening out there, you don't have to know every single little thing. It's just because of the internet that we know everything anyway. There's always been shit
Yeah, right.
happening.
Absolutely. Yeah, tune it out.
Tune it out, right?
So I have one last question that I'd like to wrap up, and
Mm.
that is, if your inner voice had a billboard, what would it say to the world?
We are one. We are definitely one. It's also a book that I did. It's my manifesto. It's that feeling that we are like all little cells in this body of existence. Some would call that God, or some would call that spirit or higher power. But we are not just like this individual called Teza or Whitney or Joe or Bob or Sue or whatever. We are all connected like molecules of water in a waterfall. And knowing that we are all connected just makes life so different, because we are not just this, it's not like we're so special, is what I'm
Mhm.
saying. We are special, and what we do with our life is special, but it's not just about us. It's something much bigger, and it's much more magical. And that's the essence of spirituality, that we are one, that we are connected in this oneness. And that's what plants are hip to. Plants have the ability to stimulate our brain cells in such a way, the sacred plants, the divination plants.
Yeah.
So I would have that billboard say, we are one.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining me and sharing your wisdom. I really enjoyed this a lot.
Oh, it's been fun. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you so much for joining me this week. If you're listening and you like what you hear, please consider subscribing and rating this podcast, as it really helps get this podcast out to other people who might be interested in hearing it but don't know about it yet. And also, if you'd like to contact me or reach me, you can reach me at unconditioningpodcast@gmail.com or unconditioningpodcast on Instagram. Thank you so much. And until next time, stay tuned in to you.